Alright then, so let's talk about the fifth installment in the Kenshin franchise. Of course, this is the one that takes things back to the beginning. It's the prequel that starts it all. Set in 1864 during the thick of the revolution when Kenshin is serving as shadow assassin for the imperialists. So, this is the story. All five of the Kenshin films have been great, and you look at the Kenshin anime and the Kenshin manga, there's so much great stuff in there, but I'm sorry, this story, we'll call it the Trust and Betrayal, or the Remembrance arc, or the Reminiscence arc, this is the best story in the Kenshin series, it's just the most interesting. Because it's so different. Kenshin himself is such a different character, and also the time period. This is the one that's the most rooted in actual historical fact. As you would expect. So much of the cast of this movie, so many of the characters in this movie are real historical figures. Obviously, you have Kogoro Katsura, who is the leader of the imperialists who Kenshin is serving under. And then, of course, you have the Shinsengumi, Hajime Saito, namely, and Okita Soji. And then, of course, you have real historical events, namely the Ikedaya incident in Kyoto. So, there's so much interesting stuff, and one of the things... all five of these films have been great in keeping things relatively grounded. You could show these films to someone who isn't traditionally a manga or anime fan, and they could just enjoy these as basically straight up samurai movies with just some, shall we say, added fantasy elements in parts. This one, I think you could even appeal to people who are fans of Japanese history, because obviously there's so much history in this, incorporated into this film. Of course, as would be expected, given the story, this film is the darkest of the bunch. And one of the things that is interesting to note, the previous four films in the franchise had all been given a 15 certificate over here in the UK. This fifth movie, The Beginning, they give it a full-on 18. And that is obviously it's a rarity, really, for films to be given an 18 certificate. Really. They are few and far between. But this movie, I think, does necessitate that, because there's a lot of... This film gets really dark. I will say, the film isn't as dark, I don't feel, as the Trust and Betrayal OVA from 1999. Because that gets very dark, and Kenshin in that one is a much darker character, I feel. The fact that he goes off the deep end in that one and becomes, for a large chunk of that story, just a soulless killing machine. And it's only as we get into the second half of the story in the OVA where he starts to regain his humanity. In the live action that we have here, obviously Kenshin is still dark, but they make an effort to establish that Kenshin is still feeling conflicted about what he's having to do. Obviously, he always maintains he's doing what he's doing to create a better world, obviously, but it's very, very difficult for him. He's struggling. He's got this inner turmoil. Whereas my interpretation of what we saw in the anime, or the OVA back in '99, was that he'd basically, obviously, yeah, there was that aspect of he got involved with the imperialists with the best of intentions. You know, he wanted to create this new world where people could live together and live in harmony. Everyone could prosper, but my interpretation of what we got in the OVA was that whole thing of the road to hell's paved with good intentions. So he got into it with the best of intentions, but as the more time went by, the more assassinations he performed, the more he was basically losing his soul. Obviously, we have that line, or the English translation of the line is, "I will serve as heaven's justice." That's a terrifying line because that's very close to the ramblings of a lunatic. And even just certain, I suppose you might say, creative or artistic decisions to make in the OVA, where he's having nightmares and he's having visions, and that whole thing as well with his cut on his face constantly bleeding. Stuff like that they incorporate into the OVA. It makes for a darker film. And also, the great thing about Suzukaze Mayo's vocal performance in the film as well, because it's very, very, I don't want to say monotone, because that would be to say it's monotone would be insulting, I feel, but it's very, shall we say, deadpan. So I think the vocal performance from Suzukaze Mayo in the OVA helps to present Kenshin as, as being a lot darker and basically a soulless killer at that point. Whereas, and maybe it's fair to say that Sato Takaru's Kenshin was always going to be more sympathetic, because we'd seen him as Wanderer Kenshin in the first 4 films, where he's so much more caring and noble and brave, and he, protecting others, and, a much softer character. Although, he can dial it up when he needs to, but not to the extent that the character was ever presented in the Trust and Betrayal OVA, I feel. But so, yeah, that's one departure. I don't, this movie's dark, but not as dark as the OVA. But then that leads to a point I've been saying in discussions I've had with friends. This, for all intents and purposes, is really a mainstream release, whereas the anime or the OVA from '99 wasn't so much. So it could afford to get away with being darker. And the whole thing is Kenshin is your central character in this, and the idea of having your central character becoming this soulless, almost demonic killer, like this is the guy you're following for 2 hours. It presents him almost, I suppose, audiences could react negatively to that and feel that there's no redeeming this guy, and like, I don't want to spend 2 hours with a soulless serial killer, so I suppose, from making it more mainstream, you've got to have that sympathetic side to the character, the idea that, yeah, this character can turn it around and go on to do the good things that will ultimately see him do. So I can totally understand from that perspective why they always wanted to maintain that sympathetic aspect, the idea that this character is redeemable, that he's, he wants to do the right thing and he is conflicted. So it makes sense why he's presented this way. Basically, this film, I think, is the best live action adaptation we could hope for, but it is, I mean, objectively speaking, it's fantastic. It's a beautifully made. Well, all five of these films, they've been fantastic in having or maintaining a consistent level of quality throughout. Of course, Kenshin, the final that we got a couple of months back, that was our grand finale, of course. So it was more about the spectacle. Interesting thing about this one is it's much more stripped back, which is good, and it plays, obviously it's more back to basics, This actually, I think, in a lot of ways, can go hand in hand with something like The Twilight Samurai from 2002 with Hiroyuki Sanada, directed by Yoji Yamada, because that was a very, very, no frills, very, very, and it was relatively low budget as well, so not flashy by any means, but it really works, and obviously because this one. Interesting thing about each of the five Kenshin films, in general terms, each of them works as like a different kind of thing. Like you have the first film, which in a lot of ways is reminiscent of an 80s action flick. You have your over-the-top crime boss who's buying up all the property he can get his hands on and bringing in weapons, stockpiling an arsenal, and then obviously it's up to Kenshin to stop him. Then you have the Kyoto Inferno, which is the political thriller. And then you have The Legend Ends, which is, I suppose, in a sense, your battlefield epic. And then you have the fourth film, which from Inishi's point of view is a revenge movie. And then you have this one, which is your straight up samurai drama. And again, beautiful production design, certainly, and great sets, great costumes and locations and everything, but it really is a stripped down thing in a lot of ways. And of course, really, really fascinating time period. Great story, of course, with and the way they do the love story between Kenshin and Tomo, it's really well done. It really is. And the way Tomo is finally brought to life after all this time, absolutely fantastic. Absolutely brilliant. And because again, that was another thing, because Kenshin, obviously, she's such an important character in Kenshin's life. And obviously she's the motivating or the driving force behind everything Kenshin does after the fact, and it's one of those where you want to make sure that character's done right. So that I think there was tremendous pressure to get that character right, and they really do that character justice. They really, really do. But yeah, it's great. Obviously, the assassination sequences, you get to see Kenshin do some scary stuff in this and some very, very vicious stuff. The finale, of course, the fight in the snow. What's interesting is we talked about how in Kenshin, the fourth film, it was about the spectacle. The grand finale to this, the fight in the snow, it's not about the spectacle, because obviously it's an ambush. It's very, very violent. It's very vicious. It's very scrappy. It's not about the choreography. It's messy, and it's supposed to be. And there are parts where it's difficult to watch, and it's supposed to be, but it's very, very well done. I will say though, there is a fight in the movie that you could point to as being the spectacle of the piece, and it's about halfway through the film. It's just ties into the back of the incident at the Ikedaya Inn. So we've had the raid on the Ikedaya, and then in the aftermath, when there's certain imperialists who are trying to escape, and obviously the Shinsengumi are hunting them down, one gets away and Okita Soji comes after him, and just happenstance Kenshin is on his way to the Ikedaya to reinforce. I think his thinking is that Kogoro Katsura's there and is in danger of being arrested and possibly executed, so he's going there to basically rescue him. Obviously turns out Kogoro Katsura wasn't there. But before Kenshin can get to the Ikedaya, he runs into Okita Soji, and they face off, and their fight scene is one of the most spectacular pieces of choreography. Because we got to talk about Okita Soji, because in terms of the Shinsengumi, obviously Hajime Saito is the one that everyone was scared of. He was the most fierce of the bunch. He was the one you didn't want to cross, because he developed a reputation, or built a reputation, of if he suspected you of any kind of treason, or not being 100% loyal and dedicated, he'd execute you on sight without a second thought. So he was the one everyone was scared of. But Akita Soji, he was the most skilled swordsman of the Shinsengumi. In terms of technique, in terms of skill, in terms of speed, no one could match him. So he was the Shinsengumi's most spectacular swordsman. So there was always going to be this thing of, well, if he comes face to face with Himura Batosai, that'll be a contest for the ages. So yeah, and that happens in this movie. They square off, and the fight sequence is spectacular. The choreography is phenomenal. And that's one of the things as well, because obviously you've got this whole samurai drama going on with Kenshin over here, and you got the story of, him falling in love with Tomoe. So you got this whole thing. So you got this one movie over here, and then every now and again it gets interrupted by this other movie that's taking place over here. This cop movie that's going on with the Shinsengumi, obviously led mainly by Hajime Saito and Akita Soji. And just every now and again, this whole other movie just intersects with the movie that Kenshin's in. And it's awesome. But yeah, the whole thing, the whole setup, the way they brought the Bakamatsu period to life was great. Again, we were talking about the production design. The costumes, the costumes throughout all of the Kenshin films have been great, but my god, the Shinsengumi uniforms in this are amazing. They steal the show. The Shinsengumi uniforms are fantastic. They're great, really, really great. And also there's a really nice touch, of course, when we get to the end sequence where Kenshin is going to do what he's got to do at the shrine on the mountain in the snow. One interesting touch, because throughout the 99 OVA, he's in the blue. But it's interesting. And it's a really cool little detail. When he goes to perform his assassination at the shrine at the end of the movie, he gets done up all in white, which I thought was a really neat touch. Basically, it's a white out there. The snow's falling heavily, so he gets geared up all in white. So he's going to basically blend in. It's just a real cool little attention to detail, basically blending into your surroundings. But again, the double, it's cool for that reason, but also there's the other side, that when the blood starts flowing, and it does, that it's going to look all the more striking on his white robes. And it's just, again, this whole thing, because the 99 OVA is such a special thing. Just even separate from the rest of the Kenshin stuff. If you could watch the 99 OVA as a standalone piece and say, my god, what a fantastic piece of, obviously not just anime, but just storytelling in general. It's spectacular, the 99 OVA. So this live action adaptation had a lot to live up to, and it does justice. It absolutely does. It's you can see the love and the care and the attention to detail, and my god, you couldn't ask for anything better. They've really done themselves proud here. And Sato Takaru, as always, man. Again, I know they've done additional books since the main series ended, the Hokkaido arc, I think it is. I haven't read those, but, you talk about, well, there's additional, they've done 5 films, there's additional material. There's part of me that's thinking, man, they gotta stop these movies. Not because they're not good, but I don't know if Sato Takaru could physically survive any more of this stuff. He killing himself to make these movies. And I tell you what, obviously started as a break dancer when he was younger, but my God, I think he might be, because we've had so many great swordsmen in film history, going back to the likes of Douglas Fairbanks, Errol Flynn, Basil Rathbone, and obviously it's continued throughout the age. Obviously Antonio Banderas in the 98 Zorro did a phenomenal job, and obviously all the stuff that Bob Anderson did over the years, but I think Sato Takeru might be the finest swordsman I've ever seen, and also, well, it's not conventional choreography either. There's a lot of wire work involved, and also there is a lot of gymnastic stuff involved. But the way he throws himself into it, it's stuff you don't see every day, and that's one of the things that makes these films unique. The action is absolutely first class. But what makes this franchise as a whole stand out, you go to see it for the action, yes, but there's a fantastic story there. There are fantastic characters, and the acting as well is also absolutely spectacular. And the way they've maintained it throughout, I think, is a phenomenal achievement. And also here, the way they were able to give us such a different movie tonally. Within the first 5 minutes of this movie, you know it's going to be an entirely different beast. Within the first 5 minutes of this movie, Kenshin's bitten a guy's ear off and killed 10 men, and this is all while he's still tied up. And then he subsequently is able to cut the ropes that he's been tied up with, and then he proceeds to kill the rest of the guys in the room with him. So, 10 minutes into the movie, okay, this is going to be very different. And then it maintains that throughout. But then, of course, as you get into the second half of the film, you get some fantastic dramatic stuff and the beautiful love story with Kenshin and Tomo. And then, obviously, you get the tragedy at the end. But, my God, what a film. Netflix did a great decision by Netflix, by the way, when they decided to buy the 4th and 5th Kenshin movies. That was a fantastic purchase. But that more or less brings this to a close. And also, I will say, the way this one ends, it ties very nicely into the first movie. And that goes back to something I was saying in my review of Kenshin the Final. The amount of time that's passed between them finishing the 3rd film and then them making these 2 films back to back. Because this was all shot. 4 and 5 were shot back to back in 2019, I'm sure it was, because they were both supposed to come out in 2020, but because of shenanigans, here we are. It's so seamless. It's so seamless, and that is an achievement in and of itself. So that wraps this up. Thank you for listening to me ramble. Please, if you've got Netflix and you're looking for something to watch, give this a try. I mean, the thing about Kenshin the Beginning, this works great as a standalone film if you want. So you could watch this one and you don't necessarily have to watch the others, but obviously you'd be missing out. But if and I appreciate some people just can't get away with subtitles. I appreciate that, but from what I understand, all of the Kenshin films, all 5 of them, are now on Netflix, and they have obviously the original Japanese audio with English subtitles, but they do have an English dub. So if you were apprehensive about not being able to get away with a movie with subtitles, there is a dub option. So again, please, because these are great movies, and I'd hate for you to miss out. So thank you for listening to me ramble. I hope you found it entertaining. If you've seen it, please feel free to share your thoughts. If it's something you hadn't heard of before and it's intrigued you, please enjoy. But that's it for me. Thank you for listening to me ramble. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all next time. Thank you, everybody. Bye bye.